These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Thom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Thom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Thom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Thom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Thom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Thom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak. It's a foggy day here in Portland, but it's a good end of the week. So Donald Trump is trying to commit treason right now, and his Republican allies are in on it with him. Along with no shortage of right-wing hate radio hosts and the Fox Network and others who are actively taking a sledgehammer to our democracy. This is wrong, and every American should condemn it. We have so far two Republican senators, Ben Sasse of Nebraska and Mitt Romney of Utah, who have come out and said, yeah, Joe Biden won the election. How do you have a functioning democratic republic when the guy at the top insists on ignoring the basic tenets of democracy, or of what Jefferson referred to as Republican government? This is how countries die. There's a great piece over at medium.com written by a person who lived in Sri Lanka, talking about how in Sri Lanka something very similar happened. The loser in an election protested and squealed and yelled and got their supporters all cranked up and ultimately lost. But 4 months later, there was this giant bombing that killed a couple of hundred people at a church, and that provided the necessary crisis moment for that original guy who lost, for his right-wing supporters to come in and take over the government and start imprisoning and killing people. I mean, that's where we're at right now. Trump is not going to be successful in this. But in the process, he is doing great damage to our republic. And he's doing it because he's trying to stay out of jail. And I suppose I can understand that. By the way, it's Anything Goes Friday. I'll be, it's just you and me all day. We'll be taking your calls. I suppose I can understand that if I was in elected office, if I was the president, and I knew that if I lost the election, I would be going to prison, then, you know, pretty much nothing would be off the table. Well, you know, I can't, it's hard to speak for myself, but, you know, because there have been no shortage of people in the history of the United States, including the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, who were willing to put themselves in well, I mean, they all were not just sentenced to prison when they signed that document. They were sentenced to hang, every single one of them. Articles of sedition and treason were drawn against every signer of the Declaration of Independence. Every single one, if they were caught by the British, was to be hanged. And they knew it when they signed that document. So, you know, for me to, you know, just be real facile and say, well, maybe I would, you know, screw the country in exchange for staying out of jail. I don't know if I would or not. Those are those horrible things that you don't know what you're made of until you confront the crisis. But I can tell you, we can see what Donald Trump is made of. He's scared silly. This guy is peeing his pants. He's so afraid of going to prison. And he knows he's going to go to prison. And he's going to lose his empire. And it's looking now like, you know, the state of New York is looking to put his daughter in prison for you know, tax fraud, among other frauds. I mean, there was all that stuff with, what was it, 50 Wall Street, whatever that building was that Trump owned, where both Ivanka and I believe it was Eric were in on some kind of sales scheme, and the DA almost brought charges against them. There were a whole bunch of complaints. I mean, this is the bottom line. He's trying to avoid jail. People say, oh, he's playing six-dimensional chess. No, he doesn't want to go to jail. People are saying, oh, well, and in fact, I have said, he's feathering his nest for the future, right? He's building his list of supporters. He's trying to get people on his side. He's going to milk them as much as he can. He's going to have a TV network afterward. All that probably true. But the level of vigor, the level of energy, the level of, I mean, flying in the Speaker of the House of Representatives from the state of Michigan and the Senate Majority Leader, these two Republican leaders from Michigan, flying them into Washington, D.C. for a meeting at the White House, that goes way beyond trying to get your Republican supporters to you know, feel nice about you. You know, this is not some Glenn Beck move, you know, where you lose your gig on Fox News and so you start your own TV network. This is not some Ron Paul thing where you lose your election to the House of Representatives and so you decide to start publishing a newsletter. Ron Paul is still publishing the newsletter, right? Right-wing crankery. .com or whatever it is, and making a living off it. But, you know, this is not that. This is a man who does not believe in democracy, who thinks that cooperation is for suckers, that the world is made up of two kinds of people, killers and losers. He has said that in at least two of his books, that he was taught this by his father. And if you're not a killer, you're a loser. And there's nothing in between. Good, normal people who believe in the rule of law and just do their job every day and raise their families and put their kids through school. That doesn't exist in Donald Trump's world. You're either a killer or a loser. And he has been a killer his entire life. And now he's been very successful as a killer as president. We have 250,000 dead Americans. And the election results say, hey, Donald, you're a loser. And he's not dealing with it well. In fact, there are psychologists suggesting that he's experiencing hypomania, which is this, you know, grandiosity and you get super voluble. You're constantly, you know, speed rapping and talking and not sleeping and it's like it's mania. And it sure looks that way. And that's often triggered by what you would call a mental breakdown. I mean, this is a guy who has been hiding the fact that he is not a billionaire his whole entire life. He's been making up myths about himself, you know, calling reporters and pretending to be a guy named John Barron and talking about how Marla Maples said it was the best sex ever. and getting that as the headline in the New York Post or whatever the tabloid was. I mean, this is how he has lived his life. Running a grift, running a scam, and it no doubt started when he was in elementary school or early, middle school or high school. I'm not sure what grade he was in when his parents finally said, "That's it. We can't stand this guy. There's something wrong with him. He is broken. We're going to send him off to a private school. No real military academy would take him." So they sent him to a pretend military academy where everybody wore uniforms and saluted and they had ex-military as teachers, but it wasn't really a military academy. And then he got out and he hired people to take his exams for him. His niece says he hired somebody to take his SAT. One of his teachers said he was the stupidest person ever and rarely showed up for class. And God only knows who wrote his exams. I mean, keep in mind, this was in the 60s. I was living out in East Lansing, and one of my best friends started a little business. I mean, it was actually legal back then. This must have been 68, where he was running ads in the local underground paper. It was called The Paper, by the way. In fact, I lived at the office where the paper was written and published. It was called the Paper Office, and it was kind of the local hippie crash pad. And he was running ads in the paper saying, "Hey, you want to buy a term paper? I'll write the term paper for you, $30." And he made a good living because there were no shortage of rich people who, rich kids at MSU who were more than willing to pay to have a term paper written. This is Donald Trump. This is his life story. He's always gotten his way. And for the first time in a big way, he's not getting his way. He's not accepting it, and he's willing to break our country. He's willing to destroy the future of our children and grandchildren just to avoid going to jail, just to avoid being called a loser, just to avoid his father's voice in his head. This man is mentally ill, and Mike Pence should be invoking the 25th Amendment right now and bringing the cabinet together and getting him out. And the rest of us need to call it what it is. It's sedition and treason.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And that said, I will pick up your calls for the next 3 hours. We will have a conversation about this and whatever else is on your mind. I got a few other news things here to share with you, too. And welcome back. Stephen in Clifton Heights, Pennsylvania. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about something entirely different as opposed to the election. I'd like to talk about Grover Norquist and the Americans for Tax Reform.
Okay.
As you probably know, or at least you may know, it's a failed experiment. It's simply not working at all.
What's the it you're referring to? His organization, or the idea of signing a thing that says no new taxes, or what?
It's the idea of signing a pledge that states, "I will never raise taxes, not even to balance the budget." Right. That, to me, seems so strict, so rigid, that you just have to wonder, well, why are we so deep in debt, $24 trillion? Well, the answer is very obvious. It's simply because taxes cannot be raised at all. We have natural disasters in this country, for example, and sometimes we need more money than is available at that time. And simply because of that, we're just strapped. We simply have to borrow money that we don't really have.
Yeah, and the simple fact of the matter is that had Reagan not dropped the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%, Clinton took it back up to 30, whatever it was, 38, 39, and then George W. Bush comes in and drops it back down another 7 or 8 points. Again, most of that tax cut was weighted toward people in the high end. And then Donald Trump does. If you add up all those tax cuts and you add in the cost of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, that is 100% of our budget deficit. And yet these guys, you know, their general hysteria. Oh my God, look at the deficit. You know, we're going to go broke. You know, a family couldn't have this kind of credit card debt. Well, first of all, the United States is not a family. We issue our own currency. Secondly, we've been this far in debt before. We were this far in debt after World War II. And how did we get out of it? We borrowed more money. Eisenhower borrowed more money and built the interstate highway system. And it so reinvigorated the American economy, you know, this massive infrastructure project, that within 15 years, we had largely paid off that debt. And then Reagan came into office. There was only $800 billion in the national debt by the time Reagan came in 1980. And, you know, with Jude Winiski's two Santa Claus theory, when Republicans are in office, run up the debt as fast as you can and take the stimulus from that and take credit for a good economy. And then when Democrats come into office, pull out that stimulus and start yelling and screaming about the debt. And that's exactly what's been going on for the last 40 years. But you're right, Stephen. You know, Grover Norquist, you know, he was kind of the tip of the spear. He wasn't alone in this. So this was something that was signed on to by every single Republican, and most of them are continuing to say this. I mean, this is, you know, you listen to the Republicans on MSNBC, and you know the Never Trump Republicans who have shows now on MSNBC. And every now and then the subject will wander close to something like, you know, expanding Social Security or improving Medicare or Medicare for all. And all of a sudden they start to, you know, just reflexively, you know, almost convulsively, you know, going, deficits. We can't have deficits. Stephen, amen. Thank you. Yeah. Grover Norquist, by the way, has been a guest on this program many times. Oh, geez. What strange times we live in. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So back in 2018, Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, bought Monsanto, the American chemical and pesticide company, and, you know, God only knows what else, you know, seeds and whatnot. Anyhow, Bayer bought them for $63 billion. Bayer just very recently set aside $10 billion to cover the cost of consumers, people in their homes, who bought Roundup and got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, from Roundup, this product that Monsanto makes that Bayer now is responsible for. $10 billion. The kicker is that the home use of Roundup only represents about 10% of Monsanto's sales of this product, glyphosate. It's amazing. There's a whole video about this for the people who support our program over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out over there. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. The other big news, that you know happened yesterday, and I was looking for my article on this. I know I printed it out this morning, but I can't find two other big news stories that I want to share with you very quickly, and then I'll get back to your phone calls. The first is that Steve Mnuchin sent a letter to the Fed yesterday, and this is a big deal. You've heard, you know, in fact, yesterday. Yeah, I'm looking for the article here. Oh, here it is, right here. Yesterday, I was talking with economist Richard Wolff, and we were discussing the fact that the Fed has basically created $3 to $4 trillion out of thin air, and used that money to loan it to big corporations, giant corporations, you know, publicly traded corporations, and to buy their stock, both things that the Fed has never, ever done before. What we didn't get into when Professor Wolff and I were talking about it yesterday is that what gave the Fed the arguable authority to do this was the CARES Act, this piece of legislation that was passed back in March that gave everybody $600 a week. It also allocated a little short of $1 billion to give it to the Fed. And the reason why is that the Fed, and I don't pretend to be super knowledgeable about all the inside workings and how this all works, but here's the 60,000-foot view. The Fed can loan money to businesses that are in crisis, and they can buy stock in the stock market, or at least they're asserting that right. But they have to do it with authority from Congress, and they have to do it with basically some seed money from Congress. The way our banking system works, if you deposit, $10 in your bank can loan out $100 based on that. There's this, it's called fractional reserve banking. So this is how money is created in our economy. A small amount of money goes into a bank, and then the bank can basically create a large amount of money by loaning it out to people. And the Fed does the same thing. So Congress gave the Fed a bunch of money, actually it was a few $100 billion that they gave to the Fed. And then the Fed was able to leverage that money to make trillions of dollars to extend the economic recovery, principally the stock market. Well, yesterday, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, sent a letter to the Fed saying, you can't do that anymore. I mean, this is and there's just a freak-out article about this over on the Financial Times website. The headline is, U.S. Treasury refuses to extend some of Fed's crisis-fighting tools. The facilities, I'm reading from the article by James Polity in Washington and Colby Smith in New York. In a letter to Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, on Thursday, Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, asked the central bank to return unused funds from 5 emergency programs ahead of their expiration. The facilities include 2 schemes to purchase corporate debt, 5 facilities. See, keep in mind, this is stuff the Fed is doing to prop up our economy. Mnuchin is trying to, these are like the legs that hold up a table. Mnuchin, one at a time, is pulling these legs out. Why would that be? Because this is all going to hit in January. And the table's going to collapse on Joe Biden. That's what they're doing. So back to the article from the Financial Times. The facilities that Mr. Mnuchin is looking to end include 2 schemes set up to purchase corporate debt, 5 facilities created to lend to medium-sized businesses, collectively known as the Main Street Lending Program, 1 program to lend to state and local governments, and another to support asset-backed securities, that is, to support the stock market. The Fed, in response to this letter from Mnuchin, issued an absolutely unprecedented press release pushing back, saying, quote, the Federal Reserve would prefer that the full suite of emergency facilities established during the coronavirus pandemic continue to serve their important role as a backstop for our still strained and vulnerable economy. In his letter to Mr. Powell, the Treasury Secretary said the end of the emergency credit facilities would free up $455 billion, okay, so it's $500 billion, in funds that could be spent on other things by Congress. We want our money back. Markets reacted swiftly to the Treasury announcement. The S&P 500 futures contract slid 0.9%, while NASDAQ futures were down 0.5 point. This is from, I printed this last night. But, we can see this right now. Look at the stock market. The stock market is going down, and it's going down rapidly. Why? Because our Treasury Secretary just, if this stands, just stopped the Fed from supporting our economy and lacking any more direct payments to individuals, which all expired a few months ago. So we're no longer getting extended unemployment. And by the way, 20 million people are going to lose their unemployment benefits the week after Christmas, because all this stuff is expiring. And on top of that, Mnuchin is saying the Fed can't support the economy anymore either, which means that as Joe Biden walks into office, he may be walking into a repeat of the Great Depression of 1929. That's how bad this is. And that's how vicious and mean-spirited these SOBs are in the White House.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I mean, for months now, they've been preventing any kind of aid to average working people. Now they're cutting aid to people who are invested in the stock market. For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
On this week's Science Revolution, Dr. Jason Hill with the University of Minnesota says cutting greenhouse gases from food production is urgent and that our food systems may be the dark horse of climate change. Investigative journalist Catherine Eban drops by in her new book, Bottle of Lies, the inside story of the generic drug boom. Mari Margil with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights will be telling us about the huge win in Florida for the rights of nature. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, wow, news travels fast apparently. Other people are reading the Financial Times with the same whoa that I was yesterday. Claudia Sahm, S-A-H-M, this just went up like an hour ago on the New York Times. I just caught it during the break. I was just checking all the news reports to see if, frankly, what I've been looking for is any word on this meeting between the Michigan guys and Trump. But anyhow, the headline is Trump trying to take the economy down with him? And then the subhead, his Treasury Secretary is shackling the nation's central bank and closing an emergency program for local governments. And as I said, that's exactly what's going on. I just tweeted that story out just a second ago with the note that in the Bible, this is, when people would leave occupied lands and they wanted to just trash those lands so that the people who used to live there or who were going to live there next wouldn't be able to live there, what they would do is they would pour salt in the fields, which makes, kills all the plants and prevents anything from growing for years until that salt washes out, and they would put poison in the wells. And that's what Steve Mnuchin is doing to the Fed right now. It's just mind-boggling. So, anyhow, as I said, anything goes Friday. Jerry in San Francisco. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You've probably heard some of the nurses recounting their recent stories of people coming in with COVID and still don't believe there's that disease exists, and yes. They're fighting, telling the nurses to take off their gear, that they don't have it, and then they try to get a kind of a communication or a Zoom with the home, and the people say, "Let us in there. There's no such thing as COVID. You're blocking us from seeing our loved ones," and so forth. And I was, my daughter's going to be going into nursing school in January, and I know your daughter is already doing work. This is, yep. I mean, we couldn't have fought World War II with this kind of situation that we have now of Americans fighting against Americans. It's just the stupidity is beyond anything that I can even comprehend. What do you think?
Right. And I absolutely agree with you, Jerry, and I think it's really important for Americans to understand where this started. In 1980, this right-wing fringe that had been in the 1950s basically all outraged over the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the John Birch Society, funded in large part by Fred Koch, Donald's father. Fred Koch paid for billboards all around the country that said, "Impeach Earl Warren." And because, oh my God, my white kids might have to go to school with a black kid. And that right-wing movement that just swept the country. I mean, my dad took me to one of these meetings in like 1961 or 62, a John Birch Society meeting, and somebody gave me a copy of John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, and I took it home and I read it cover to cover probably 3 times. And it was all about how the State Department was filled with communists. And I was freaked out, and that's why I went door to door with my dad in 64 when I was 13 for Barry Goldwater. But the point is that movement was being funded by billionaires, or what in today's money would be billionaires, like Fred Koch and like the H.L. Hunt and his brother down in Texas. And these guys were on a Jeremiah, on a campaign, on a hate campaign against government, because they saw government as regulating their lives. Government was going to, the Supreme Court in this case specifically, but then Congress implemented laws to even put that Brown decision into law. Government was going to force their white kids to go to school with black kids. That was their initial major freakout. And then that got added to with, oh my God, Richard Nixon signs the Environmental Protection Agency into law in 1972, I think it was. And then the oil billionaires, and again, Fred Koch, and now his sons, went into hyperdrive. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Now they're going to regulate the oil industry. And the Environmental Protection Agency, are you kidding? And the developers got in the act. Wait a minute, we've got to do environmental impacts before we can, rip up a forest and put in a bunch of, subdivision. And so this meme that developed that came into full bloom in 1964 with the nomination of Barry Goldwater as the Republican Party's nominee for president. The essential core of their argument was that government has become too powerful. Government is forcing our white kids to go to school with black kids. Government is forcing our businesses to not, to stop polluting and poisoning people. Government is trying to regulate. The other big freak out was the seatbelt stuff. This was Ralph Nader in the 70s. Unsafe at Any Speed was published actually in, I think, 67 or 68. But between that and Rachel Carlson, I mean, this is why in 1971, in the Powell memo, Lewis Powell specifically named Ralph Nader and Rachel Carlson and said these, who had started respectively the consumer movement and the environmental movement. And he said these people are promoting communism. They're going to destroy the American way of life, and they're going to destroy the American system. And what Lewis Powell refers to it as the American system 4 or 5 times in the Powell memo. And what he means basically is unregulated, unrestrained capitalism and all this kind of stuff. So this, Barry Goldwater ran on this, and he was still considered a crackpot and a fringe guy. He lost so badly in that election of 64, yeah. And then what comes along is Ronald Reagan in 1980. Finally, they get one of these right-wing crackpots into the White House. And the first thing he says to the American people when he's inaugurated on January 20th, 1981, his opening speech to America is, government is not the solution to your problems, government is the problem. And so these guys who didn't want government telling them that their white kids had to go to school with black kids, and then expanded that to say we don't want also government telling us that we have to treat our workers well, that we have to pay a minimum wage, that we can't trash the environment. These guys took over our government, and they took over the Republican Party. And this anti-government thread, at the time, back in the 80s, there were those of us who were saying, if this thing reaches its logical conclusion, you're going to have the destruction of the United States. What these guys are actively, openly advocating really is the destruction of government. And now you get Steve Bannon, the months after Donald Trump is sworn in, some reporter said to Steve Bannon, what's your primary agenda? And he said the deconstruction of the administrative state. Well, what's the administrative state? It's called the federal government. What does deconstruct mean? Tear it down, destroy it. Our goal, Steve Bannon said, in effect, of the Trump administration, our goal is to destroy the American government. And they have largely, well, they haven't largely done it, but they've taken a good chunk of it out, and now Donald Trump is running around with a sledgehammer trying to break everything he can. And frankly, I think one of the reasons that he's trying to stop the transfer of the transition to Joe Biden is he doesn't want the Biden people coming in while he's in the middle of destroying all the evidence he can destroy. I think that they're going to do once they figure it out that it's lost. There is going to be you're going to have shredders running 24/7 in the White House. Back to you, Julie.
And then in the process, they've also destroyed science, facts, and so forth. Yep. And so now you see that people don't believe things that are right in front of their eyes.
Right. Anthony Fauci has to have a security detail for his wife and kids and grandkids because he's getting death threats from crazed right-wingers who have been believing this Goldwater, Reagan, Trump stuff that the government is lying to you, and now the government has gotten these scientists to lie to you too. And you know, and it just goes on and on and on, and it is so destructive. It is so destructive. Jerry, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Tom, it was very fortuitous, your rant that you went on in reference to minutiae and this stock market. But anyhow, I've been calling my Congress people all morning long, dealing with this McConnell leaving and taking all of his boys from the Senate home during this period, right? Now, what I've been saying to my Congress people is that they were complaining about defunding or reimagining the police. This clown is literally defunding America. That includes
and the police in the process.
And everybody, you see. And so it's like, where is the outrage with this? And this has been going on since Nancy had put forth out of the House the HEROES Act, right?
Yep.
And that HEROES Act included all the municipalities and everything that needs to be funded in this space and time where everything is getting ready to collapse. So, I mean, it was like fortuitous, Tom, to hear you do your rant. So I think this kisses what you're talking about. And that, yes, what they're trying to do is to collapse the system. Actually. And so it's like the oligarchs have won. We have been sitting up against socialism and communism during the Cold War and whatnot, but we never imagined that the oligarchs or the imperialist capitalists were also competing for America. And I think they have won.
Well, I don't think they've won yet, David, but they're 90% of the way there. And hopefully they have awakened enough Americans that we can push back and fight back. I mean, this is very much like the 1920s. The oligarchs had taken over. That was the Roaring 20s. The oligarchs totally took over. And they crashed the system, and America rebooted in 1933. And I think we're about to reboot again. David, thank you for the call. So well said.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you want to complain about people saying defund the police? Mnuchin just defunded the police in cities all over America by cutting the Fed facility to support municipalities. And welcome back. John in Seattle listening on KBCS. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom.
Hello, John.
Yeah, Tom. Like you, I was born in Michigan. My grandfather was a state senator, in fact, and so I feel very, very strongly about this. And, you know, I think we should change our terminology. Instead of saying Trump is pressuring or Trump is negotiating with these people, we should just say outright what it is he's trying to bribe them. And with his power of the presidency, he can offer them head of a commission, some monument naming commission, or ambassador to Grenada or something like that. And I think we should.
Oh, you're talking about like these what is it called? The state board of canvassers guys from Michigan, or the legislators.
Yeah, any of those folks. He's got to be doing something like that, because that's the one thing he's got.
Oh yeah, he's totally transactional. I agree.
And so we should just start saying, hey, the Trump is bribing them. But, you know, one other thing that comes to mind with all that is, if this were any sort of illegal, like a trial or something like that, this would be witness tampering. This would be jury tampering. And so there must be some sort of laws against that. And if there aren't, we damn well better get those started soon in states, federal, whatever. But
yeah,
anyway,
I'm completely with you, John. Yeah, I think that what we're and really the question that should be being asked, and I need to probably ask it more frequently on this program, is what kind of bribes are what are the bribes that Trump is offering to these Republican officials who are responsible for certifying the election in these various states? And because we know, he tried to bribe the president of Ukraine. He begged the president of China to help him out. He had some kind of deal going with the president of Russia back in 2016. This is what he does. He essentially pays people off. Yeah, I'm totally with you. It's terrible. Thank you for the call, Louisa in Roseville, California. Hey, Louisa, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I hope you're well.
I am so far.
Wonderful. I've got 2 points I'd like to talk to you about today, kind of briefly.
We have just 1 minute, so pick one.
Oh, okay. Last week I called about the illegal ballot drop-off boxes here in California that Republicans placed in 3 counties. And I did a follow-up call to the Secretary of State, and I talked to a gentleman there who said that he thought that almost all of them had been picked up by the Secretary of State office and disposed of, but we don't know whether all of them had been. But also the voters who had dropped their ballots off there had all been instructed how to resubmit their ballots. So at least we know that was taken care of.
Resubmit? You mean the phony ballot boxes that the Republicans put out were not, they didn't take the ballots to the Secretary, to be counted?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if that's what happened, but from what this gentleman said is that they informed all of the voters who had dropped off their ballots in those boxes how to resubmit their ballots. So that's what I was told.
Amazing. That's amazing. Louisa, if you learn anything more, give us a shout, would you? This is a story that's worth keeping track of. What happened to the ballots in those phony ballot boxes that the Republicans put out? It's amazing. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls on whatever may be on your mind today, whatever topic you want to talk about. Pigeons, flying saucers, the weather, Trump treason. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it. And that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and picking up your calls. Jerry in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Well, my dad was in the Second World War, and he was in Germany and in Europe. And I was thinking about the invasion in Normandy if the leaders of the Republican Party had been the Allied commanders. And I can imagine the headline that was on June 6th. On June 7th, the headline in America would have been "Invasion Canceled. Allied Commanders Fear Tweet from Hitler and Truman." What kind of courage does the Republican Party have? If they're afraid of a tweet, we'd be speaking German right now.
Yeah. And so far, we have Mitt Romney and Ben Sass. And in fact, when I get off the air, I'm going to send them both a tweet saying thank you for being patriots. Even though I disagree with almost everything they stand for, and they're still standing with Mitch McConnell to block any kind, as are David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. They're all standing with Mitch McConnell to block any kind of aid to Americans. But still, they're at least standing up to this proto-fascist in the White House. Excuse me, Jerry, back to you.
Also, I wondered if we couldn't start a, we had profiles in courage. Could we start a profiles in cowardice or in treason? And also, Benedict Barnold, okay? We should do something about him. I have one question for you, though. Talking about with the idea of how do we unite the country. Well, our problems, in my mind, started when Reagan eliminated the Fairness Doctrine. That's what brought us to Limbaugh and Fox and MSNBC. We have allowed people to gravitate to places where they only have their personal prejudice reinforced, and they never hear the other side. And I think that that's one of the reasons that our country is so divided.
Yeah, I don't entirely disagree. The Fairness Doctrine was much more limited than most people realize. It didn't say that if you carry 3 hours of Rush Limbaugh, you have to carry 3 hours of Thom Hartmann. What it said was when a radio or television station offers an editorial opinion, in other words, when the owner or management, I used to work at Channel 6 in Lansing, WJIM TV. This was back when I was 17 years old. I was a floor director there. And
did you know John Gebhardt? Did you know John Gebhardt? Okay, he worked there too. For years.
Really? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was a great job. They even had a little cafeteria and lunchroom where we had they fed us. It was a really good meal. But in any case, when I was working at WJIM TV, as the floor director, I would manage the guy who owned the radio station. WJIM was named after Jim, who was the kid of the family who owned the television station. Excuse me. And they also had a TV radio station, WJIM Radio, and he would go on the air and he would say, "Here's my opinion." He was the owner of the television station, and he would say, "Here's my opinion. I think that we shouldn't build this new bridge, to connect the Potter Park Zoo to whatever." And because he did that, he would then have to be followed by a member of the community saying the opposite. So if he gave 2 minutes, the community member got 2 minutes. But it was only the owner of the station. It was only the editorial voice of the station. If he had chosen to put on a program, the Joe Pine Show back in that day or something like that, there didn't need to be any balance for that. So, the Fairness Doctrine did two things. Number one, what I just described. And number two, it required that radio and television stations actually produce or carry what was called programming in the public interest, which was interpreted to mean news at the bottom of the hour on radio and news for at least a half hour during prime time on television. And the networks produced that news at great expense, really high quality news. Bureaus all over the world, and they all lost money on it because it was the price of their licenses. That they had to have that. So when the Fairness Doctrine went away, that was the major impact. I was living in Germany at the time when Reagan nuked the Fairness Doctrine. And I remember driving down the street in the Autobahn listening to this story about how the Fairness Doctrine is gone now, and thinking, okay, that's going to be the end of news. And sure enough, within 6 months, the news division at CBS News, was put under the supervision of the Vice President for Entertainment Programming. It had gone from being something that they lost money on, but they provided a public service. They lost money on because that was the cost of keeping their license. It went from that to being something that would produce a profit. And what happened with the news then was that it went from being, these are the things that real serious journalists and scholars believe every American should know about. It went from that to whatever's going to get the most eyeballs. If it bleeds, it leads. What's the most sensational, weird thing out there? That's what we're going to cover. And that is the kind of mentality that brought us Donald Trump and the Republican primaries. Jerry, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll be back in a few minutes here after the break at the top of the hour and continue with Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Viagra for your brain. Just don't tell Limbaugh he'll want it. By the way, did you see this thing? COVID-19 causes impotence? Amazing.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book for the Thom Hartmann Book Club today is A Nation Forged by Crisis, A New American History by Jay Sexton. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 9. The quest for national security and global power, America's shifting position in the international economy, and fluctuations in immigration have made the United States the nation that it is today. Americans' foreign relations have been conditioned its history not only in their cumulative effects over the long haul, but also as a result of their volatility. In periods of crisis, America's position in the world has lurched in unexpected directions. For as inexorable as the rise of the United States appears in retrospect, there have been contingent moments in which the very existence of our nation was up for grabs. This is the essence of crisis. The world turned upside down, the known replaced by the unknown, panic reigning as people struggle to maintain their balance and shifts in the very ground beneath their feet. It came with a speed and ferocity that left men dazed, New York Times correspondent Elliot Bell wrote of Wall Street's catastrophic collapse in October of 1929. Quote, the market seemed like an insensate thing that was wreaking a wild and pitiless revenge upon those who thought to master it, end quote. Crises are contagious, spreading like viruses from one realm to another. It's not without reason that the word crisis was associated with medical conditions and health scares in the 19th century. Each of the periods under consideration in this book were less a singular crisis than a set of interlinked crises. A political crisis could trigger an economic panic, which in turn could intensify social conflict, and so on. As these pandemics spread through the body politic, crisis itself was normalized, becoming an almost accepted characteristic of an age. Just as foreign crises have spread to the United States, domestic ones have spilled across its borders, unsettling foreign countries and peoples, as well as reconfiguring America's connections to the world. Consider the fateful winter of secession that followed the 1860 election of Abraham Lincoln. The crisis over slavery that divided the Union into warring sections that led to a series of sharp reversals in America's position in the global system. The foreign capital that had rushed into the roaring American economy in the preceding decades suddenly began to flee. Indeed, more capital left the United States in 1860 to 1862 than came into it. Also a once-in-a-century occurrence. One of the world's most valuable commodities and America's largest exports, Southern cotton, was confined to the ports of the Confederacy as a result of Richmond's ill-fated diplomatic strategy, leading to unemployment and social unrest in the British textile town of Lancashire. The most unexpected reversal was how the national security that the United States had attained after the war against Mexico in the 1840s was suddenly imperiled, with European powers encroaching once again upon the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, the Confederate emissaries across the Atlantic in search of alliance were in search of alliance with Britain. Our country, Secretary of State William Seward lamented in early 1861, after having expelled all European powers from the continent, now threatened to relapse into an aggravated form of its colonial experience, and like India, Turkey, China, and Italy, become the theater of transatlantic intervention and rapacity. A wider view of American history that looks beyond the nation's borders brings into focus not only the migration patterns, economic flows, and international rivalries that have connected the United States to the world, but also those rare moments in which the very existence of the nation was in question. Perhaps none was more pregnant with implications than the autumn of 1877, when the fate of the Patriots' bid for independence hung in the balance. Having proclaimed their independence to the world the previous 4th of July, their cause had stalled on the battlefield and in the diplomatic courts of the old world. I think the game is pretty near up, Washington privately confessed at year's end. To accomplish their independence is not quite so easy as to declare it, the British philosopher Jeremy Bentham haughtily remarked. But then a series of events forever changed the course of modern history. The stunning Patriot victory at the Battle of Saratoga in October, the drafting of the Articles of Confederation in November that, for all its limitations, further demonstrated the political resolve of the Americans. And most of all, the alliance signed with France in February 1778, which provided the Patriots with the resources, military assistance, and naval power that ultimately tipped the scales in their favor. There are comparable Saratoga moments in other crises in U.S. history, as we shall see. These contingent moments played out in their own distinctive ways, but are joined by a common denominator that has been curiously forgotten in our age of U.S. global power. Foreign states and people have played decisive roles in the critical moments of American history. As we make our way through our own era of global instability, in an unprecedentedly interconnected world, there's perhaps no more important lesson from the past to keep in mind. Crisis may beget crisis, Franklin Roosevelt said, as his administration transitioned from battling the Great Depression to entering the Second World War. But the progress underneath does not wholly halt. It does go forward, end quote. Like so many of Roosevelt's public statements, this one reveals a truth even as it conceals others. The United States came out on the other side of its greatest crises as a stronger and more efficiently organized nation, as Roosevelt suggested. The process of mobilizing resources to counter threats catalyzed innovations in political economy, such as the creation of a national financial system during the Civil War, and the economic reforms of the New Deal. The book is A Nation Forged by Crisis by Jay Sexton. Possible actions to provoke.
And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Anthony in Port Orchard, Washington. Hey, Anthony, what's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Yeah, I'm just wondering, why aren't the Democrats out in numbers, the congressmen and senators, pushing back against this? I mean, I can't turn on the radio, the TV, social media, where I'm not seeing Rudy and Trump's clowns out there pushing this conspiracy theories. And this has got me worried. I mean, you know, the Democrats, they appear to be sitting back, and I don't put anything past the crazies anymore. I mean, I really don't.
I can tell you what I believe to be their strategy, and I could be wrong about this, but I think that this is what's going on, is that the news media is doing a pretty good job outside of Fox News and Right Wing Hate Radio. The news media is doing a pretty good job of pointing out that Trump's got nothing. He's lost the election. He's flailing. I mean, it's at the top of the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's everywhere. And if Democratic politicians come out and outside of leadership, I mean, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have both made clear what they think. And other Democrats are doing it. I mean, I saw a thing from Eric Swalwell this morning on Twitter. You know, there are Democrats who are speaking out. But generally speaking, I think that either they're not getting coverage, or more likely they don't want to make it look like they're trying to get political gain out of Donald Trump's disaster, as it were. That's just speculation, but you know, Anthony, I get what you're saying, and you know, and I'm seeing it too, that there's not a lot of conversation out there.
You know, I'm a history teacher, and I'm really worried. I got kids, you know, asking me questions on the online classes and stuff, and I'm worried that, you know, this is the end of America. If he steals this election, I couldn't see us ever coming back. I bet he would appoint himself president for life or king and name his children as his heirs. But it's really got me scared. And I want to know, why hasn't somebody asked the Republicans, who do you owe allegiance to, America or Trump? I mean, because now it looks like that's who the most important thing is in their life, is my allegiance to Trump, not America,
right,
and not the people.
Right. Who are you in with, the United States of America, or a petulant billionaire who is owned by several foreign governments? You know, and I think it's a really, really good question, and it needs to be put forward. Anthony, thank you. Spot on. Patrick in Fountain Green, Cedar City, Utah. Do I have that right?
Park City, Utah. Tom, thanks for having me.
Great.
I was a guest on your program years ago, so it's nice to hear your voice again. Although I try to listen to you as much as possible. My Anything Goes Friday dialogue is built on, really, it's kind of the intersection of everything you guys have talked about so far in this program. Obama appeared on 60 Minutes last week with an open mic with Scott Pelley, supposedly, you know, the gold standard of journalism with 60 Minutes, and literally just dropped the mic on Trump about integrity and virtues and the truth of the presidency, as if President Obama was the gold standard. Meanwhile, it was the lies of the Obama presidency that covered up the greatest grift and cover-up in history, Wall Street's great financial crisis, that was all engineered, by the way, that led to a $29 trillion transfer of wealth to the guys who did it, and they doubled down on version 2, which, of course, you've been talking about quite a bit today, and Mnuchin's role just brings that full circle. But I guess my point with that is context, and I wanted your thoughts on this for your viewers, is ultimately the Obama lie, which is the neoliberal lie, made the neo-fascist lie inevitable, and we're in a death spiral.
I would agree with that analysis, and hopefully this will be the shock to the system that wakes us up, that takes us out of that, what you're describing as a death spiral. Because you're right, and I think that neoliberalism plays a big role in this, and let's not forget the father of modern neoliberalism, the first president of the United States since Herbert Hoover, who embraced neoliberal ideology, was Ronald Reagan. And we have been living in a neoliberal era since 1981, and no president has backed away from that. And I am very hopeful that Joe Biden will. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hopeful, because it has gutted this country. It has gutted the American middle class. It has provided fertile ground for people like Donald Trump to come along and say, hey, though he wouldn't say it this way, but those neoliberals, keep in mind, it was Reagan and Bush who negotiated NAFTA. Those neoliberals, sent your jobs overseas. Those neoliberals are the people who gutted America and therefore put me in power, and I'll do something about them. And then he goes ahead and he's more neoliberal than they are. And frankly, I think, short of fascist, we've got to come up with a better term than neoliberalism, because people go, what's that mean? And it sounds sort of like you're attacking liberals. Oh, not at all.
Well, Tom, can I offer this as a final thought for you to ponder? So, look, through my lens, what we're dealing with here is literally, quite literally, and I happen to unfortunately know a lot about this because I'm an investigative journalist and a documentarian that put it all together, but with a whole lot of people. But the bottom line is that if you want a term for this, people are calling it neo-feudalism. I call it a corporate fascist state undergirded by criminality and corruption. That's the point. If you've got the Fed bazooka, if you've got control of the Fed bazooka, the demand isn't coming from the aggregate demand of the people. It's coming from the system to benefit the system of deception. Honestly, it sounds insane because it is.
No, it's called propping up the stock market, Patrick. And the stock market is where the wealthy people put their money, and it's turned into, because Reagan changed the rules in the mid '80s. I think it was '86, '87.
Deregulation.
He changed the rules, saying that executives could be compensated with stock, and corporations could buy their own stock. Those two things were illegal.
Absolutely.
Those were reforms after the great market crash in 1929. Those were both illegal. Reagan legalized both those things, and what we've had ever since is an explosion in the price of the stock market. It's not the value, it's the price. And why is the price going up? Because there are fewer stocks. Why are there fewer stocks, actual shares of stocks? Because companies are buying them back and retiring their stocks. And in fact, there are literally half as many companies right now publicly traded in the United States, listed on public stock exchanges, as there were in 1980. Half as many. We are seeing massive consolidations. This is why I wrote this book on monopolies. We're seeing massive consolidation, and the vehicle for that is the deregulation that happened during the Reagan era. And it is gutting the American economy, and it's gutting the American middle class. Patrick, very well said. Thank you for the call. Charlie in Redwood City, California. Hey, Charlie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's actually Redwood Valley, California, but that's okay.
Oh, Redwood Valley. You're right. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, I would love nothing more than to see Donald in prison, but frankly, I don't think it'll ever happen. And the reason is you get Secret Service protection for life, and he'd be too much of a risk if he was in prison. I don't think Secret Service is going to want to go to prison with him.
Oh, they could just give him his own cell and put a Secret Service agent on, sitting in the hall outside. I mean, it would be the most boring duty for the Secret Service, but hey, they're used to boring stuff. I mean, these are the guys who sit in the stairwells in hotels to make sure that nobody's trying to creep onto the floor where the executive is. So,
I'm thinking at best he might end up with house arrest, but that would be the big thing. Is if he was in prison, he'd be a huge security risk with what he apparently knows.
He's already a huge security risk, and God only knows what he has, what he has handed out to these other governments. And now he's a flight risk. Charlie's spot on. I think guarding the presidential cell in Leavenworth would probably be a very noble activity for a good patriotic member of the Secret Service. We'll be back 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truth, some multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back. Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Well, it's a great show today. One of my uncles who is doing very well in his retirement because of the New Deal, he's probably raking in $50K a year with his Teamsters pension and Social Security, and he's 90, going on 95. So he's got, 30 years of very lush, but the only book he probably ever read was None Dare Call It Treason. And I remember the day he brought it over. And I remember the day he brought it over to my mom and dad, and they just kind of rolled their eyes politely. And
is that back in the 50s or the early 60s?
Oh, that was the 70s. But I mean,
wow.
But he was, he was, it was still around, and so it's,
John
he went from a John Bircher to he loved Rush Limbaugh, and my mom used to just get so upset. She goes, "Don't you know that they don't want you to have that big fat pension you get or anything?" "Oh, I worked I drove 3 million miles for that." And it's like, we know you did. You deserve every bit of it, but they don't want you. But the reason I would call is, the saying is, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them. And I don't like Biden's cabinet. And
well, we don't know his cabinet yet.
Well, the ones that they're suspecting of. There's a lot of oil and pharmaceuticals and people there.
Let's wait. Let's give him some time. I mean,
one more thing.
I fully expect that there's going to be some of that kind of stuff going on, and probably a lot of it. I mean, that's just been the way it's been since 1980. I am so relieved that Donald Trump is not going to be president anymore, that I'm willing to put up with a lot for at least a few months, Jeff. I mean, let's hold off on the circular firing squad for a little while, okay?
Okay, all right. I thought we could talk now that we had the. I think
well, we
have.
can. I mean, you said what you said, and I didn't say don't say that. I just said I'm not going to go there.
All right.
I have
one more thing.
Sure.
I would like to see. I'd like to see AOC and Ro Khanna both primary Chuck and Nancy in 2022. Because the only thing power understands is demand, and I think that would get their attention.
I would support both of those efforts, and I think that
Well, I'm putting it out there for everybody to hear and spread the word.
Yeah, Chuck has been breathtakingly ineffectual. I used to be on the press release list from his office. I have complained once on the air, several times in private, to 3 other United States senators, Democrats, begging them to tell Chuck Schumer that the press releases that he's sending out every day can't be printed. They're formatted in a way that makes them unprintable. And he's taking really simple stuff that Donald Trump would turn into a tweet and making it 12 paragraphs, which nobody ever reads. And why don't you get your damn act together in terms of public relations and messaging? And I keep, saying this. And finally, about a month ago, I just put Chuck Schumer on my spam list because I couldn't do anything. I get these press releases, and I would have to spend 15 minutes reading it and go through and highlight the 12 relevant words, and then I couldn't print it. I mean, it was just because I had to print stuff out for this show. It was so sad that these guys are like, living in the 1970s or something. It's just mind-boggling. Jeff, thank you for the call. I would like to see. I'd love to see Ro Khanna as the senator from California, although there's others, Barbara Lee, Karen Bass, there's some very, very good candidates. Senate Majority Leader, I'll take anybody. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Chris in Seattle. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I've moved to San Diego now, but
okay.
I think it's the Democrats who are responsible for this. You don't blame a drug addict for being a drug addict, but you do blame his enablers. You said it earlier. It's turned to infomercial, to entertainment. Rudy Giuliani, you look at that press conference we got. We need some people who are frothing at the mouth. Why aren't we out there right now yelling and screaming about what they're doing with the Fed? Okay, they get all the coverage.
Well,
because
I am.
Yes, you are. I know, but you're not frothing at the mouth. So our leaders aren't. Yeah. Joe Biden should be out there screaming and yelling. How did Donald Trump come to power? He's a reality TV president. We are a reality TV world now. This is what gets, as you said, it used to be about journalism. Now it's about entertainment. And the news isn't going to cover you if you're being appeasing, okay? They want somebody who can fight. This is why people falsely believe that the Republicans are better on security than the Democrats, even though we're the ones who went out and got Bin Laden, and we're the ones who actually go
and won
and
World
get
War
these
II.
things. Yes, exactly. But we don't sing our own praises. We don't get out there. You know, you've got the Republicans who have been screaming, lock her up, with no evidence, no proof, nothing, for years, even through this entire presidency. Why aren't we out here screaming, you know, our leaders? Why isn't Nancy Pelosi, when the day after Obama was inaugurated, you had the Republican leadership in force out there screaming and yelling about how they were going to stop this, and you know, I've heard you say many times that the Republicans are playing chess and the Democrats are playing checkers. We're not even playing the same game. They're playing issues of nuclear war, and we're playing appeasement. Until we get out there and realize that the world doesn't work the way it used to. Okay, it's not the 1950s and 60s anymore. It is about sensationalism. And, you know, sometimes, you know, that's why Clinton was who he was. He was one of those few guys, when he took on Chris Wallace, even after his presidency, you don't see other leading Democrats doing that. Until we catch on that, man, we've got to, you know, we've got to be more Republican than the Republicans. We've got to get out there.
Well, there's a fine line, Chris, and this is my whole Wetico rant. You don't want to become the people you're fighting. But I do agree that the Democrats, number one, should use a lot more drama and theater in what they're doing, and no more of these damn boring speeches where Chuck Schumer is reading some monotone crap on the floor of the Senate and hoping that it gets covered. And number two, that we need to be managing expectations. The Democrats need to be out there right now saying loudly, Steve Mnuchin just set up the destruction of the economy starting in the first week of January. And by the way, what's going to happen 3 weeks later? Joe Biden gets sworn in. So Steve Mnuchin just started the process, and it takes a few weeks for these kind of things to work their way through the economy, in some cases a few months. So if you shut down the Fed on the first of the year, probably the major impact is going to be in March or April or May. And so, you know, the Democrats need to be pointing that out. Get ready for another Great Depression. Get ready for another major stock market crash, because Donald Trump set the table and Steve Mnuchin just, you know, knocked all the china on the floor, to mangle a metaphor. But you absolutely get what I'm saying. And I'm with you. Chris, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Well said. Angela in Cumming, Georgia. Hey, Angela, what's on your mind today?
Yes. Hi, Tom. How are you? It's been a while, but I just wanted to, I don't want to sound like a negative Nelly, and I don't want to be accused of bashing the Democratic Party or anything, but I'm saying this to hopefully have someone here in Georgia listen. I mean, I've lived in Georgia all my life, in the South all my life, and I'm telling you, the way things are going now, Ossoff and Warnock, as far as the Senate runoff is concerned, they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big. All of the signs are there. Things are not going as they should be going.
What are you basing that conclusion on, Angela? I'm sorry, we have about a minute to the break here.
Okay, very quickly. Number one, the polls are showing that it's neck and neck. 48, 48, 49, 49 between Ossoff and Warnock. When living here in the South, when you're looking at a Democrat against a Republican, especially if one of the Democrats is African American, if it's neck and neck, the liberal, the Democrat, the African American, they're going to lose. You cannot have it that close and expect that is the way things are going to end up. There is no comfort level in that. If it's that close, they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big. I look at things such as the SSB in Mississippi. I look at things as Jamie Harrison in South Carolina. I look at Doug Jones in Alabama. Mm-hmm. When it's that close, they're going to lose, and they're going to lose big. But also the common people are not sitting and talking about this the way they should be. And the commercials that they're putting on, Ossoff and Warnock are putting on, they're too softball. They're being savage, and they're not fighting back.
Oh, my. Angela, thank you for the report from Georgia. All the more reason we all need to be using whatever tools we have, social media or whatever else it is, to support Warnock and Ossoff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history, and we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, the Central Plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log on to my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan.
We're available on Sirius, HTV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. Our video for the day are for Thom Hartmann Program supporters. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. Is talking about how the Donald Trump presidency has been fundamentally destructive, not just to the United States, not just to our political norms, not just to our body politic, not just to the institutions of the presidency and our governance in general. His disrespect of judges, his disrespect of Congress, his pushing the boundaries of what the Article 2, an Article 2 office can do. But it's also destructive around the world because of the things that he's not doing, that aren't getting attended to. We've got major parts of the world that are spiraling into chaos that could, several of them could trigger World War III. And instead, he's sitting there live tweeting Fox News, literally every morning and every evening. Check it out. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back to Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. By Trump summoning the Michigan certifiers to the White House to change their verifications again, Michigan State, he is breaking the law, and so are they, by interfering with an election. And also to one of your previous callers from Georgia.
Well, hang on just a second, Jessica. Let me just respond to this first. Sure. He's not bringing the Board of Canvassers people to the White House. He called them and pitched them, and I agree with you. That is election interference, and that may well be a felony. But the people that he's flying to D.C. are the Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives and the Senate Majority Leader for the Michigan Senate, the two senior Republican elected officials in the state. And his plan with that is to ignore the vote count. It doesn't matter who won. The law, the Constitution says, and this was reaffirmed, by the way, in the Bush v. Gore decision in 2000, because the Florida legislature had prepared and had on the floor, they just ultimately never voted on it, but they had on the floor of the House of Representatives in Florida a piece of legislation that would have had the recount given the vote to Al Gore, the recount that got stopped, the one that was ordered by the Florida Supreme Court. Had that recount actually happened, and had it gone to Al Gore, they were going to pass a law in Florida saying that, which they can do under the Constitution, saying that all of the electoral votes for Florida went to George Bush anyway. So that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get the Michigan State Legislature to pass a law that says, for this election, we are going to ignore the old law that says that whoever gets the most votes in Michigan gets the electoral votes of Michigan. And we're going to pass this new law that says we don't have enough confidence in the process here, or that'll be the fig leaf. So therefore, we're going to award the votes to to Donald Trump. So that's what's going on there. Just to clarify. Anyhow, Jessica, what about Georgia?
Georgia, I have worse news for. I hope that the woman is listening that called in earlier. The Republican State House there is changing the rules on the mail-in ballots in Georgia. Now you have to have proof of an ID, with your mail-in ballot, which is going to be so hard for state IDs during COVID for those who don't have licenses. And they know the wealthy Republicans are fine with their IDs. So they know what they're doing. They're cheating, and
it goes beyond that, Jessica. It's if you're going to have to send a copy of your driver's license along with your ballot, how many people have copy machines in their homes or printers and scanners in their homes? I have one because I do this show and I write books. I'm guessing probably most people who are middle class, upper middle class, and very wealthy pretty much all have, a home printer and a home scanner or something like that. They could do that easily. I'm guessing people who earn less than $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year at the most probably don't have a scanner and a printer at home, and they won't be able to make and nobody has copy machines anymore, and so they're not going to be able to make a copy of their driver's license to include in their ballot, so they would get excluded.
Right.
I read the story about that a couple days ago, Jessica. My read of it was that this was an attempt, but that it probably would not pass. Do you know something more recent than that?
I just heard that today, but the thing is, I think that's too personal of information to have all those licenses out there too. I think Democrats have to protest that.
Oh yeah, and it's an invitation to identity theft.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, there are already 70,000 mail-in applications going out already, the ballots. So people are wanting to vote there. And then I want to say, last thing, I'm donating $200 to fairfight.com. And we're writing 300 postcards to Indivisible. And I think I'm going to put on all those postcards. They're wanting verification. And I don't know, maybe they have to wear hazmat suits and go vote. I don't know what's up. This is crazy.
Yeah, it really is. Jessica, what it's revealing is that the Republican Party does not believe in democracy. It's, this is probably one of the reasons why Joe McCarthy back in the 1950s said, don't ever actually use the name of the Democratic Party. Don't call it the Democratic Party. That sounds democratic, and people love democracy. That sounds too nice. Instead, call it the Democrat Party with the emphasis on the rat. And Fox News has taken this to heart. Most of the Republicans have taken this to heart. Occasionally, you'll hear a Republican referred to as Democratic colleagues or the Democratic Party, but mostly it's the Democrat Party. They're all still dancing to Joe McCarthy's tune, and it just shows, with disgust, it shows us what the Republicans think of the United States of America. They don't give a damn. They just want to do whatever their billionaire donors, the people who own them, tell them to do. Joan in Arvada, California. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind?
Hello?
Joan, you are on the air.
Hey, Tom. This is Joan in Denver. I have turned 65, and I need to sign up for Medicare, even though I'll be working till I'm 70. I've heard people on your program, including yourself, saying that Advantage is a scam, and from my research, I think I need to sign up for A and B and a good Medigap policy. But when I heard you say anything goes Friday, I thought I'm going to call Tom and ask him.
Well, you're absolutely right. In fact, the New York Times just a few weeks ago had an article about a fellow who had a Medigap or had a Medicare Advantage plan. These are not actually Medicare. And I know Joe Namath and Danny Glover are on TV pitching them. These programs are a scam. Right. And if you buy one of these programs, the big problem is you can't go back to normal Medicare easily. This guy had bladder cancer, and he needed to get a doctor who was a specialist in bladder cancer, and there was none available in the network that his Medicare Advantage program covered. And so he tried to go back to normal Medicare because, pretty much everybody takes that, and Medicare would take him back. But he couldn't get a Medigap provider because when you turn 65 and you get Medicare, which covers 80% of your costs, and then you get a Medigap plan that fills in the remaining 20%, that they cannot turn you down regardless of your health if you have pre-existing conditions and things like that. But if you don't do it when you're 65, if you don't initially sign up for a Medigap program like that, and instead you go with Medicare Advantage, when you discover that your Medicare Advantage is not going to pay for everything and they're basically going to screw you, and you try to go back on Medicare, Medicare will take you. But the Medigap plan people will look at your health history and they'll decide whether they're going to take you or not. And this guy could not get a Medigap coverage plan. That's the big gotcha. The line that they used in the New York Times was basically, once you choose Medicare Advantage, it's irrevocable. These parasites have got you for the rest of your life, and they will milk you dry. And yeah, it sounds great. Oh, dental coverage. Oh, vision coverage. Oh, no premiums. Well, how do they afford to do that? Plus, they're spending $100 million a day on television advertising. They do that by refusing care to people. By saying no, I'm not going to pay for that procedure. My personal, I think that there are some good Medigap programs out there. I stay as far away from United Healthcare as I can, just because they have such a terrible reputation and they've been such bad actors over the years. And two of their CEOs took over $1 billion out of the company. That said, look for companies that have the word, when you're looking for insurance, look for insurance companies that have the word mutual in their name. The oldest mutual insurance company in North America was started by Ben Franklin in 1757. And what a mutual insurance company is it's like a credit union. If you put your money in a bank, the bank is owned by its stockholders, and if the bank shows a profit, the stockholders get a dividend. If you put your money in a credit union, the credit union is owned by the people who put their money in there. You become a member of the credit union. You can even run for president of the credit union. You can run for the board of directors of the credit union. Well, mutual insurance companies are the same thing. They are companies that don't sell stock. They are owned essentially by their policy owners, and they're there for their policy owners. So there's a couple of companies out there that have the word mutual in their name, and I would put those, when I'm shopping for a Medigap policy, after signing up for Medicare Parts A, B, and D, I would, and sign up for the drug thing, that's Part D, I would then look for a company that has the word mutual in their name for the Medigap policy, and I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised. Joan, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are some of us still out here. We'll be back. Stick around. It's Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls in just a moment. Thom Hartmann here with you, exposing the con and conservative. And welcome back. Joe in Seattle. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, good morning. I wanted to talk about socialism. I know you had Richard Wolff on yesterday. We're talking about a few things. But I've been noticing when you had Richard on, he calls himself a Marxist economist, and that's basically what he does. He provides an economistic analysis of the world. But I think it's important when we talk about socialism to have a clear and defined definition of what socialism is.
Good luck with that,
and
Joe.
what it has been. Well, I think there's, I think throughout history there's been two trends within socialism, but I think it's important for us to find out what has worked in socialism and base it upon successes and what has actually existed, as opposed to an ideal that we're striving for.
I'm listening.
Do you agree? Yeah.
I don't disagree. I think the distinction is the one that needs to be made is the one that Bernie makes, which is you've got, people who call themselves socialists, like the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which was communism, and the National Socialists in Germany in the 30s, which was fascism. And then you've got countries that call themselves democratic socialism, or they call themselves social democracies, like Germany, France, the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if the UK does or not. All the Scandinavian countries, and that's really what he's talking about when he refers to democratic socialism. And Bernie never uses the word socialism without prefacing it with the word democratic.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake because it's kind of a capitulation to anti-communism, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not a very strong argument because when you go down
can you
that
name
road,
a country that ever worked as a communist country, Joe?
Oh, yes, Soviet Union, China's working well. Cuba has 3 vaccines.
I was in the
COVID.
Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. I drove around. I've driven in Trebis.
Yeah.
Well, those are the East German cars. Ladas were the Russian cars.
Yeah, the GDR.
I've been both
right.
in Russia and in East Germany back in the day, and it was not working. I can tell you, it was not working. Yes, they had universal education, and everybody had a job, and everybody had health care, but all of it sucked.
Well, I mean, think about the historical conditions of that region, and what they had developed over
East Germany and
40,
West Germany were the same people speaking the same language with the same 1,000 years of history, and they were night and day.
I'm not talking about East Germany. I'm talking about Soviet Union, really.
Well, East Germany was
in their development of socialism,
virtually identically to the Soviet Union. In fact, Putin was the KGB guy in East Germany most of his career.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think it's important for us to base our definition of socialism on what has actually existed and not some far-off idea that has never been achieved. And I think you can do that through a scientific socialist analysis. And these countries that we have seen throughout history, China, Soviet Union, DPRK, Cuba, they're using scientific socialists to achieve what they want for their people.
Yeah. Cuba is coming around, but they're embracing some free market capitalism, limited free enterprise anyway. Joe, I don't disagree with Marx's analysis in Capital, but his solutions I don't think work. And Joe, thank you for the call. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So we've got a new video over at TomHartmann.com for people who support our program. It's about private equity firms. Mitt Romney's company, Bain Capital, and Steve Schwarzman's Blackstone, and some of these private equity groups have long been considered risky investments. I mean, billionaires put money into these things, and sometimes they produce really high returns, but they also have huge fees, and they operate kind of like a black box. There's all kinds of hidden stuff. And what they have been salivating about for years, Schwarzman talked about this just a few days after Donald Trump was inaugurated, was they wanted to get their hands on people's 401ks and IRAs, people's retirement money, their pension funds. And it's been illegal. And Trump and Eugene Scalia, the head of the Labor Department, just legalized this practice. The consequences could be dramatic. The video's over at TomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. A lot of crazy stuff going on, and going forward, we have a demographic, climate, economic, you name it, tsunami coming at us. We're going to need some good troop strength and try to get back some of the swing voters, struggling couples up in Youngstown and Warren, Michigan, and places like that who aren't really racist or homophobic or xenophobic.
Oh, they've just been gutted by the NAFTA deal that Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush put together and then got signed into law by Bill Clinton, among other things. I mean, the whole neoliberal experiment has just gutted their lives, and the destruction of unions by the Republican Party. Yeah, spot on. Was that your question?
No, the gist of my call is relating to that. Some of the optics we're seeing, you're in Portland, and so a lot of us are scratching our heads like, what is going on in Portland, to a lesser extent Seattle, then when something occurs in Minneapolis 1,500 miles away, or even further, that they're in the streets for 110 days. It's just something doesn't quite fit in there. Are these? They're not Proud Boys, but are they just loud boys? Are they going to be dependable troops going forward?
What's going on here in Portland and to an extent also in Seattle and probably in a few other cities is that there is this this kind of marginalized fringe group, and a lot of this is being stirred up by a political cult based out of New York City that Bob Avakian started years ago, called the Revolutionary Communist Party. And the theory, and it's mostly young people who are politically naive, essentially. And the argument that they will make is that our political system and economic system is so corrupt it cannot be fixed, and therefore it has to be torn down. And the way you tear it down is through civil unrest and disturbance. You need a massive reboot. And so the way that they're trying to bring that about is by being out in the streets every day and smashing windows and stuff like that. Here in Portland, This is there's like maybe 200 of these people. They show up every night. They keep getting arrested and getting let loose. And it's all happening in about 3 square blocks. Nobody in Portland, I live in Portland. Louise and I drive around. We go for rides just to keep from going stir crazy or go to pick up, carry out food from restaurants. And unless you happen to bump into that 3 square block area, you would have no idea that there's any kind of problem going on in Portland at all. But Fox News has been camped out in that 3 square block area ever since George Floyd was murdered. And they have turned this into a major television production. But there's no crisis here in Portland. There's no crisis in Seattle. Seattle had their little, free area there for a few weeks, and then it kind of fell apart, and that was the end of that. But this is more than anything else. This is a media thing, and these for lack of a better phrase, kind of stupid left wingers. These Avakian followers are basically in cahoots with Fox News. They feed each other, right? They provide Fox News with the footage. Fox News provides them with the coverage. And it's like a symbiotic relationship. And it's frankly, I think, for American democracy, I think it's a destructive one, a destructive symbiosis. Larry, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Terry in Gainesville, Florida. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I'd like to talk about voter ID and the requirements of voter ID. And it's a little bit misinformation to say that voter ID, the requirement for it disenfranchises some citizens. I'm sorry, but I'm a minority, and I still believe that you should prove who you are to solicit a ballot to vote, and that I wasn't disenfranchised. I went to the courthouse, and I got my ID, and I got my voter registration card, and I voted. So what's so difficult about it? Why does it disenfranchise minorities?
Terry, when you first register to vote, you have to prove your citizenship. You put your signature down, and a signature is a biometric marker. It's harder to fake a signature than it is to get a fake ID. But that wasn't enough for the Republicans. They wanted to throw up barriers. My best friend lives in New York. He's lived there 70 years, and he hasn't had a driver's license in 30 years. He hasn't owned a car. He lives in New York. So what's he supposed to do, right? He used his passport and his rent slips when he registered to vote. But what good is a voter ID law going to do other than keeping him from voting? Who is trying to vote without
in Florida,
ID?
We have
just
a
doesn't
state
happen.
ID.
Terry.
I don't drive, but I have a state ID.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good on you. The point is that if you are poor and live in a city and use public transportation and don't drive, there's a lot of people in America who don't have driver's licenses. And if it was a more general ID requirement, like when I registered to vote when I was 17 in Michigan, it was pretty straightforward. No problem. But saying that you can vote using your gun license, but you can't using your state college ID, even when the state colleges confirm citizenship, this is just naked, attempts to prevent students, old people who are old enough that they can't drive any longer, who tend to vote Social Security and Medicare, and poor people to prevent them from voting. Period. That's all it is. And the Republicans, by the way, who have championed this, Terry, will tell you that. They're right up front about it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Suddenly, social distancing is our new national etiquette. A
supplanting handshakes, hugs, gatherings, and other forms of ingrained communal behavior by us humans. Awkward, disconcerting, isolating. Yet, as we frantically scramble to deter the health and economic ravages of COVID-19, we might benefit by pondering a self-inflicted cause of the contagion's disastrous spread: social distancing. For some 40 years, American corporations and governments have imposed economic, political, and social policies to distance the financial fortunes of the wealthy few from the well-being of the workaday majority. Consider the interrelationship of multimillionaires with the unseen kitchen staff of restaurants where they dine. To further enrich themselves, such multimillionaires have forced low-wage policies on food preparers, denied health coverage for them, and lobbied to kill proposals to provide paid sick leave. So, a kitchen worker coughs because he or she is infected with coronavirus, but doesn't know it, since the worker has no health care coverage for testing. Even though running a fever, the staffer must come to work or lose the job. A few days later, a multimillionaire sneezes because, well, COVID-19 doesn't distinguish between rich and poor. The very proposals that plutocrats have been blocking for years, like living wages, Medicare for all, home health care, and others, are exactly what a sane government would adopt to avoid the consequences of inequality that now confronts every American. This is Jim Hightower saying the actual disease that's forcing social distancing on our country is the widening separation of rich elites from the rest of us. And the cure is a national push for renewed social cohesiveness. The catastrophic spread of COVID-19 reveals a truth we too often deny. We are a species of completely interdependent beings.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Living in the Chemical Age, How an Ounce of Prevention Can Protect Your Family from a World of Toxins by Dr. Janet Newman. This is from Chapter 1, How Did We End Up Here? In modern history, we entered the industrial age with the invention of steam-driven engines in the 1760s. In the technological age, the second industrial age, which took place between 1870 and 1914, we saw the advancement and expansion of both manufacturing and electrically powered systems. In the last quarter of the 20th century, we entered the information age when computers and the internet became the norm. Famous author and editor Leon Weitzeiler wrote a poignant book review in the New York Times on January 11, 2015, which said, quote, "Every technology is used before it is completely understood. There's always a lag between innovation and the apprehension of its consequences," end quote. While these great advances in modern history have made aspects of our lives easier and more convenient, a negative byproduct has resulted that we are beginning to recognize. It now seems that we are in the full-blown midst of what I refer to as the chemical age, an era in which our environments and bodies are the constant recipient of a deluge of chemicals, which are the unfortunate byproducts of our drive for advancement. This bombardment of toxic chemical exposure is silent and in most cases hidden, but it has the potential to be deadly. These chemicals are in our food and in our tap water, and on any given day we're exposed to dozens of toxins in our environment as well as in the products we choose to clean our homes and to use on our bodies. For the first time in human history, the New England Journal of Medicine tells us children born today will have a shorter projected lifespan than their parents, in large part due to obesity-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, etc. They will likely get diagnosed with a disease at an earlier age and die earlier than their parents. Generations have always outlived the generation before them, but not anymore. People are getting sicker earlier. But why? A growing number of doctors and scientists now recognize many illnesses result from excessive exposure to toxic materials in our environment. The body tends to become inflamed and accumulate fat when storing excess toxins. This is a global wake-up call. How did we get to this point? And what can you do to keep yourself and your family safe? Many scientists and notable organizations such as the Agency for Toxic Substances and the Disease Registry have begun to study the impact of toxic substances on humans, which is an essential first step to fixing the problems we're encountering. For instance, for example, the incidence of colon and rectal cancer, once considered rare in young people, is on the rise in people in their 20s and 30s. According to the American Cancer Society, people born in 1990 have double the colon cancer and quadruple the risk of rectal cancer compared to someone born in 1950. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely. But our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history. And we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Anything Goes Friday. Somebody called earlier and said, why aren't the Democrats yelling and screaming about what Trump's up to? Steny Hoyer, who is the number 2 Democrat in the U.S. House of Representatives, he's the Democratic House whip. He's the one who runs around and pulls votes together and basically manages the herd, right? He's the cat herder. On behalf of Nancy Pelosi. Steny Hoyer just said what Donald Trump is doing, quote, borders on treason, end quote, which is about as strong as you can get. When you're going to accuse somebody of a crime, you could come right out and say this is treasonous behavior, but saying it borders on, that's really, really strong language for a member of Congress, particularly a member in senior leadership. That is, to the best of my mind, unprecedented. So, and yeah. It does border on treason. In fact, I think it is, at the very least, sedition, and at the most, treason. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up a really thorny issue, and this is basic to the whole idea of carbon capture, our society, sustainability of society, and this is revisiting all our engineering standards, all our engineering codes and our specifications. Here's an example. When you look at what Jimmy Carter did about the zero energy housing, and that was a standard that he pushed and for engineering, so that housing would be built to not require heat input and cooling inputs. And of course, when Reagan came in, oh no, we can't do that. While he's ripping off the solar panels off the White House, he was also completely dismantling all that footwork that they've been doing. Now, we talk about CO2 capture, and we're talking about heating. Now, in the Midwest, and here, of course, most of the country is either natural gas or it's going to be oil-based. So when we talk about CO2 and we want to end the CO2, yes, the transportation part of cars and stuff, that's an obvious and simple. But we start getting this feedback loop that we're going to have hotter days, more erratic weather. That's baked in. We
already have that. What's your point, David? Where are you going with all this?
We've got to, all the engineering schools, everything, all the assumptions that we have about planned obsolescence, about how the lifespan of building materials. We don't do energy. We don't have energy costs associated with bricks, with glass, with concrete. So when they tear down a house, they just bulldoze it, put it in grabbers, and take it to a dump. Nobody's out there trying to chip out the bricks or save the glass or, recycle the building materials, because the energy costs of inputs into building those things are not considered at all. And this gets back to engineering standards and what we are teaching the civil engineers and the architects and the engineers, the whole idea of planned obsolescence. We throw it out. You and I are the same.
No, I get your point. So are you proposing that we change... that the federal government, change the way that they define things, or that engineering schools start, looking at building renewability essentially into their equations, as it were, or into their education? I still don't understand specifically what you're calling for.
This isn't just to the United States, because it affects the entire world. And yes, it's calling into everybody. It's calling into question our basis that we are using in our design of our future, because we have painted ourselves in this hole where we do not recycle. So we do not have mandatory ability to repair. Everything is throw one package and throw it out. And we're both old enough to have a collective model.
I get it. I'm with you, David. And while we're at it, I think that we should, Underwriters Laboratories standards changed back about 20 years ago for power supplies. And what it did was it caused everybody to do these external power supplies. We call them wall warts, which are just parasitic. They're consuming, trillions of watts of energy every day nationwide. And we need to do away with that too. David, I'm spot on. Good thinker. Appreciate it. Dawn in Minneapolis. Hey, Dawn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I have a question for you about national security. It's clear that Trump and the criminals in the White House are clearing the shelves and pouring gas and everything on their way out. My question is, are there any provisions or any safeguards to prevent him from taking his knowledge and selling it for his own personal gain or spreading it around the world? Because he can shred files and wipe hard drives, but he still has all that information in his head. Is there any surveillance or any security regarding past presidents?
I don't know. I would say, though, Dawn, that I think that he already has taken American secrets and used them for his advantage. In his first week in the White House, he invited Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, and Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, into the White House and shared with them top secret intelligence that outed an Israeli agent. And we don't know if somebody died as a result of that or not. It was kind of a one-day story, because it's just been one scandal after another, and every single day Trump wakes up and says, how can I get at the top of the news headlines today? And every day he figures out a way to do it. But and then you look at Erdogan. Erdogan came out and just publicly said he might nationalize the Trump properties, the Trump hotels. Now, Trump, it's a licensing deal, but nonetheless, that's about a $2 million a year cash flow for Donald Trump. And then Erdogan, within a week of saying that, Erdogan went to Donald Trump and said, I want you to pull out of Syria, and stabbed the Kurds in the back, because we don't like the Kurds. We're having problems with our Kurds in southern Turkey, and they're hanging out with the Kurds in northern Syria, which is the border, the Syrian-Turkey border. And we want to kill them all. And so Trump said, okay, cool, we'll pull out. And we did. And as we were pulling out, some of our reporters were there, and the Kurds were giving us the finger and yelling at us. And what happened? The Turks came in and they slaughtered people. They're slaughtering civilians. You've got 1 million civilians now in that region as winter is coming, living in tents and on open ground, women, children, families, hopeless, in some cases starving as a result of Donald Trump trying to protect his $2 million a year cash flow from his hotel, his 2 Trump towers in Turkey. I mean, it's just, and that's just the stuff that we know about. That's just the stuff that's on the surface. That's the stuff that was on, the front page of the New York Times. So, yeah, I don't know if we have a way of tracking that down. I'm guessing we do. And I sure hope that the people who do have the ability to do that are keeping good track of all this stuff, because it's a crime what's going on. Dawn, thank you for the call. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, from a weekly, the radical right's totalitarian methods in the campaign and seriously threaten American freedom. The mutual confidence essential to free government is slowly being cut away by propaganda. Step by step, decent citizens come to tolerate attacks upon the loyalty of loyal men. And that's not from a recent weekly. It's from a weekly that's not around anymore. This is from a January 26th, 1965 edition of Look magazine with a picture of Julie Andrews on the cover of it. And it had 4 articles in there on Conspiracy USA about the radical right wing. I mean, there's our vegetables to chew on for a little bit that we recognize as back in 1965. We don't recognize it today. And a little dessert.
Well, keep in mind what happened in 65. What happened was that Lyndon Johnson got sworn as president, right? And that was the end of the Goldwater. There was this huge right-wing kind of last gasp of the first effort, which was the Goldwater presidency, which went down in flames just 2 months before that. So back then, it was perfectly acceptable to talk about right-wing extremism. By 1970, you couldn't. I mean, that's how rapidly the backlash started. But Mark, thank you. Was there a final point you wanted to make in about 10 seconds?
Yeah, there was that Ian Fleming wrote James Bond. He also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. You mentioned James Bond's treatment of women. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the way Ian Fleming wrote him. But Ian Fleming also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which got made into the Disney movie of the same name. So just a little fun.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. And welcome back. Bob in Mill Creek, Washington. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Tom, you there?
Yeah, you're on the air, Bob. Bob?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, listen, Tom, I watched a movie called Hillbilly, and it's about the Appalachians and why people vote Republican. And it basically a gal was raised there and in the Appalachians, and then she moved to California and became a writer and a producer. And she anyway, I don't want to get into all the specifics. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it's really worth watching Hillbilly. The Democrats aren't giving them anything, and Republicans at least promise them stuff. And
which is so ironic because it was the New Deal that saved Appalachia. The Democratic New Deal. Yeah. And it's Lyndon Johnson's programs that feed Appalachia. And provide health care to Appalachia. Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, WIC, SNAP. I mean, these are all programs that Democrats passed. And, the Kentucky, this is why the Appalachian, the eastern Appalachian part of Kentucky, this is why Kentucky gets $2.41 for every dollar they send to D.C. is because of these programs that came out of the Great Society of the New Deal. But I'll check out the movie. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. I appreciate the heads up. Tom in Seattle. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Yes, appreciate your program. I'd like to talk about Medicare Advantage. I'm going to have to check into it more. I'm going to follow up with that New York Times article you mentioned. But I'm with Kaiser Permanente. You have them there in Portland. And they've got a great reputation. And
they do.
You're agreeing with me? They do?
Kaiser has a great reputation. Kaiser is one of the nonprofit players in the healthcare arena. And so you're not going to get screwed as badly as you would get if you had United Healthcare or one of these, or Aetna or one of these other companies. But if you have a crisis and you don't have a Kaiser facility near you, you're going to be in a world of hurt, Tom.
Well, I guess I'm lucky there because I live in Seattle. They have facilities all over. So you're saying I might be okay if I'm living in Seattle?
You may well be. And having already purchased Medicare Advantage, particularly if you have any pre-existing conditions, you will probably find it very, very difficult to go back to regular Medicare. At least you picked one of the less toxic of the Medicare Advantage programs, in my opinion. I'm just sharing my opinion. But, Social Security Works is all over this, and you may want to check out some of their podcasts, and socialsecurityworks.org is their website. They're very, very knowledgeable about this. And I'm in the middle of writing a book about it, The Hidden History of American Medical, or Healthcare rather, which just went off to the editor last Friday afternoon, a week ago, and will be out next summer. But I have been up to my eyeballs in this stuff for the last 6 months, Tom, and I can tell you, it's ugly when you look at what some of these Medicare Advantage plans do to people and how they just screw people, elderly people, particularly as they get toward end of life. I mean, they just go out of their way to screw people. As Mark Pocan was telling the story on this program about his 90-year-old mother, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, no, we don't want to provide that. It's a tough one. Tom, good luck. Thanks for the call. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, Jerry in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I was wondering if when our idiot president has people that he puts in positions of other, fires one guy, puts another guy in, all this stuff, does the person, is he entitled to a retirement? I mean, would we have to pay for his retirement when?
Oh, that's a good question. Jerry, I don't know the answer to that.
People he puts in.
I'm guessing it. Yeah, I'm guessing it depends on the position, whether, there are benefits associated with them. There are 4,000 or 5,000, as I recall, political appointee positions in Washington, D.C., and those will mostly go when Donald Trump goes. The thing that concerns me, though, is that he has been installing people in civil service positions. He's been firing people who have a lot of seniority in agencies, or pushing them out, and then replacing them with Trump toadies or science deniers over at the EPA, for example. He'll put in, science denying scientists or global warming denying scientists. and putting them into civil service positions. And once you're in a civil service position, you're basically, it's like being a union member. You've got protections, and you can't be fired unless you commit, some horrible crime or demonstrably can't do your job. And so Joe Biden is going to have a hell of a job over the next 4 years, pulling carrots out of the garden or weeds out of the garden, pulling these civil service people out that Donald Trump has been burying, embedding in EPA, in Homeland Security, in the Interior Department, in the CDC. I mean, he's just been sprinkling them all over government and using the power, which Republicans have always hated, of civil service in order to make it even harder to get rid of them. That's my biggest concern. But in terms of pensions and benefits, I just don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm sorry. Dennis in Pine Top, Arizona. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Good morning or good afternoon, case may be. I'm a disabled veteran, so is my brother. We're Vietnam era. We were drafted off the city streets of Flint, Michigan, as an ex-Vietnam era combat paratrooper and as an ex-city cop. I know for a fact that based on probable cause, the commander-in-chief can be arrested for dereliction of duty and or conspiracy to commit treason, which would, of course, tagline into all the other people from McConnell to Minutia. But
So, Dennis, who does the arresting?
Say again?
Who does the arresting? I mean, the Justice Department, back during the Nixon administration, came up with this rule, and this was when they were looking into Nixon's crimes. And so, of course, it was Nixon's Justice Department, that the Justice Department, the federal prosecutors cannot build a case. They can't even investigate the possibility of building a case against a sitting president. And then that got reaffirmed when Bill Clinton, during the Monica Lewinsky time, had his Justice Department come up with, a legal opinion doubling down on that. I disagree with both of them. I think they're completely wrong, but it's not the law, but it's the policy of the Department of Justice. So if not federal prosecutors, directing the FBI, who does the arresting, Dennis?
You're correct. We're not talking about the investigative stage. We're talking probable cause arrest for dereliction of duty. The commander in unlawful orders and with 20,000 lives and all the incidents corrected.
Yeah, but he's not subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, if that's what you're talking about, Dennis. The UCMJ does not apply to the president. He's a civilian.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. The commander-in-chief is arrestable by the Joint Chiefs of Staff for reasons that...
He is not subject to the UCMJ, to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And for people who don't know what we're talking about, and let me just clarify this real quickly, Dennis, and then you can build your case again. When you join the military, you surrender your normal constitutional rights. You give up your free speech rights, you give up your privacy rights, you give up a whole bunch of rights in exchange for being in the military. And in exchange for those rights, you now are under a separate legal system, which is referred to as the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There's a separate court system. There are separate lawyers. This is what Lindsey Graham was. He's a JAG officer, which means he's a military lawyer. It's a completely different system. But the whole idea of making the president the commander-in-chief of the military at the founding of this republic was to have a person who was not in the military and was not subject to military discipline to have a civilian overseeing the military, to provide balance, because the problem was pretty much every military coup is done by the military. Dennis, if I said anything, did I get anything wrong there? You got about 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, you did not say anything wrong. I believe that the Inspector General has the ability to, in conjunction with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to take him into custody.
Well, I hope you're right, and I'd love to see it. Dennis, thank you for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and in goes Friday. Sharon in Texarkana, Arkansas. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
I'm fine. I was just calling to check, and I want to know, is there any way we can sue our Senate for not doing our stimulus package and take worrying about America instead of worrying about President Trump and what the hell he got going on?
Unfortunately, Sharon, the way that we keep politicians, hold them to account, as it were, is through elections. Politicians have something called sovereign immunity, which means that they cannot be sued for doing their job, failing to do their job, or doing their job badly. They can only be kicked out by either being voted out of office or being recalled or impeached, depending on the state and depending on the politician.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Good talking to you. I wish you the very best. It would be nice if we could on occasion, but it would also be a never-ending thing. Joan in Ludington, Michigan. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
I wanted to tell you about what happened to our township clerk. I live outside of Ludington, and this poor woman, she's all by herself. She doesn't have a crew. It's just her. And she spent, typically she would just do nothing all day Wednesday because she would be exhausted. Well, she finished up counting all the ballots, and there had been all of this stuff with the mail-in, so that sort of made extra stuff for her to do. And she spent all her time doing this. She finishes up at 7 in the morning on Wednesday, and she just kind of pooped out, And then the telephone starts ringing all the time. She finally unplugged it. Somebody put her name and address on Twitter, and people were calling and saying that she was having dead people vote. There was a thing where you put down your birth date, but it wasn't necessary to vote because you had the address and the signature and all that business. But somebody interpreted to have somebody. There were people who interpreted it to mean that it was the computer put in 010101. So they said, this is a dead person. She's voting. You have her voting, and she's 119 years old.
Right.
And they just harassed her like you wouldn't believe. She estimates that it was somewhere around 30 to 45 calls before she unplugged her phone. They absolutely drove her crazy, and they were accusing her. And she said what was really stupid about the whole thing was that they won in a landslide. Wait till you hear what the landslide was. Trump won 1,472 votes, and Biden won 1,054 votes. So you see, he was winning by a landslide. And this is a good Republican lady. Why would she do this? There's just no sense to it, and they just about drove her crazy till she undid her phone.
Yeah,
I
that's so sad.
I couldn't believe it.
It's
Trump
Trump and his flailing about trying to keep from going to prison next year, and losing his empire. Once he's no longer president, the banks will start foreclosing on him. They're not going to do it while he's president. But he's looking at he's going to lose everything, and his kids are going to lose everything. And I mean, this ultimate grift of running for president of the United States.
$400 million in debt.
Oh, that's what he personally guaranteed. He's actually $1 billion in debt that we know of, and maybe more.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this guy has been living on borrowed money for a long, long time, pretending that he's a rich guy. And before that, he was living on his daddy's money. He's a failure. He's always been a failure. He's never been a competent businessman. All he does is con people. He's a professional con man. And the con is coming to an end, and he's not happy about that at all. So anyhow, Joan, I got to move along, but I'm so sorry to hear that story. Please give our very best to your local town clerk there, and it's another cautionary tale. I mean, this is, Donald Trump is spinning this stuff in order to try and keep out of jail, and there's a lot of people who are believing it, who are taking it seriously. People who otherwise might be good people. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them. Anyhow, Tom in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to applaud your continuing discussion of Trump supporters, what makes them tick, and your use of the word fascism. I think that's totally spot on. I just had three quick observations. I read an article in Sunday's Times. I don't know, it was on the front page, and about, I think the title was How These People Aren't Ready to Give In, or They Don't Want to Heal, and the Democrats, and then what you said about Kasich a minute ago sort of underscored that. But at the end of the article was what really made me mad. There was a picture of this guy and his wife, and he said, it was somewhere in Texas, Mason, Texas, and he says, Biden just wants to make things good for the immigrants, and these people come in here to steal my job, and they sit on their butts all day and do nothing. And that really, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not an immigrant. My grandparents were, but out here in New Mexico, you see these people selling wood at the side of the road. They work all week and they chop wood, and they're selling anything. They'll do anything to make a quick buck. And the point I wanted to make there is that they just want the same thing we do. They're Americans, Tom, just like you and I. They may not be citizens, but they want the same thing we want. The other point, it's really got me
Well, if
angry.
I could just speak to that, Tom, very, very, very briefly. To a certain extent, I agree with some of the concerns. You can't, if you're going to have a labor system in a country, you have to be able to control the supply of labor. And so, yes, we're a country of immigrants. Yes, historically, about 1 million people a year become U.S. citizens. They immigrate to the United States and become U.S. citizens. Trump has radically cut that back. And yes, we've got about somewhere between 10 and 15 million people in the country who are not citizens, many of whom are working. The problem is that prior to the Reagan administration, the burden was on employers. If an employer hired somebody who was not a citizen, in order to exploit them, in order to be able to pay them crap wages, knowing that they couldn't, retaliate or anything like that, the employer would go to jail. Reagan changed that with the immigration reform that happened during the Reagan administration. Reagan made it so that the immigrant goes to jail and the employer skates. And as a result of that, you now have, I don't know if it's still going on, but it was certainly going on 4 years ago. You had meatpacking plants in the upper Midwest advertising in Spanish in newspapers in Mexico for employees. And the reason that they were doing that was because they wanted to get rid of the unions. Being a meat packer used to be a really well-paid job. There was so much money in it that the Meat Packers Union in Wisconsin started the Green Bay Packers. That's why it's called the Packers. And so, so we've got to, you've got to have some control over that. And frankly, I'm not real enthusiastic to round people up and kick them out of the country or anything like that. I think that we need to provide some sort of a path to citizenship. But Reagan set up a system which has been in place now for 40 years, where employers can use non-citizen labor to break unions and hold down wages. And that needs to be ended. That needs to be ended. We need to go back to throwing employers in jail when they violate those laws, like every other developed country on earth does. I lived in Germany for a year. It took me 6 months to get a work permit to be able to live in Germany and draw a paycheck. I've worked in Australia. It took me 3 months to get a work permit in Australia, and that was just to give speeches that I got paid for, for a 3-week period. So, we need to have something like that. But you don't have to go crazy racist talking like that. Anyhow, Tom, back to you. You've got 30 seconds.
Don't imply that they, that they don't work, that they don't want to work. But
these are people who work their asses off.
Yeah, and then some. But 2 other quick points. We were watching TV a couple of weeks ago and saw one of those Trump trains, where people driving around in their pickup trucks with their guns and their
the wannabe ISIS guys.
Yeah, and my wife sits up and she says, "You know where I saw this before? Argentina, 1979. What does that tell you, Tom?"
Yeah, and we also saw it in Iraq as ISIS was taking over, and you'd see these guys coming through in their caravans of pickup trucks with their giant ISIS flags and their AK-47s. Yeah, spot on, Tom. That's exactly what it is. You're looking at fascism at the ground level. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls in just a moment, 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Annika in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Annika, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've called a couple of times. It's good to hear from you, and I'm thankful for you. I just wanted to. I suspect something. It makes sense that Edward Snowden, God bless him for what he let us know, because I got to put a little thing over my camera when on my back when I don't use it. But I do believe that there was an exchange between him and Putin because he specialized in cyber terrorism at the NSA and CIA and cyber intelligence. And that's what, like you talk about the book, The Next Cyber War, but that's what's been really breaking our country down, is the cyber intelligence and the way that Americans think and the way we use our internet and I believe that the only way one could receive asylum and this protection is by some sort of exchange. Dictators would not just let somebody stay there for free. So I'm not trying to give.
I don't know that that's the case, Annika. Snowden has come out and said that he's not helping out the Russians or anything like that. But it seems to me more likely that's what.
I would think a little bit. Even if it was years ago, some information on how our weak points from some things in exchange. And of course, because he said things, he predicted this 2015 on Vice that he would win, and some of the behaviors that are going on specifically in government, he's said blatantly, so it's as if he already knew. But Putin's not the kind of person who would just let somebody. There's always an exchange. And
well, I
so
think Snowden is a trophy for him. I don't know if he's.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a fan of Ed Snowden, frankly.
Well, that's what I mean. I follow him. He's helped keep my mouth shut and not get kicked off Twitter for some things that he's said to let us know what we're getting into. I wanted to bring that up, and then I wanted to let people know that there's a church out here in Portland called AP Creek. They're condemning the pastor is condemning Black Lives Matter through, I guess, he watches his Facebook users, his congregation. One of my neighbors goes there, and he's promoting Proud Boys. They don't wear masks because they think God is going to protect them, and they sell tickets to go to the services, and they also live stream in buildings where you have to still buy tickets, and people are going on vacations now. My neighbor's parents are going on a plane to Hawaii, and they've been going to this church where people don't wear masks. So that's one of the reasons why we are like, okay, worship God at home, but people you can't take this to an island. And I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to also say this. Look, we can't tear each other apart. I know, I grew up in the business. I told last time I told you I'm the granddaughter and great niece of the Pointer Sisters, and so I'm a bit connected, and I've heard of a couple of billionaires who have killed themselves because they put their business in China and it's bad. All our jobs are outsourced to the Philippines and South America through these apps.
I got it.
And it's
Annika, I gotta wrap it up. But thank you for the call. Time will tell about Ed Snowden. But so far in my mind, he's a hero. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So Donald Trump has just deployed Patriot missiles to Iraq and pointed them at Iran, has gone out of his way to threaten Iran, saying that they will pay a very heavy price. If any of their proxy groups, any of the Iranian-supported militias or groups, this is basically the Shiites, the majority of the population of Iraq. In Iraq, if any of them were to attack American forces, Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo will use this as an excuse to launch a war against Iran. This is insane. The New York Times is reporting military commanders, the Pentagon has ordered military commanders to plan for an escalation of American combat in Iraq, in the region, and, quote, prepare a campaign to destroy an Iranian-backed militia group that has threatened more attacks against American troops. We crippled their country with sanctions, and now we're threatening a war so that Trump can get reelected. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com for our supporters. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Sam in Dunwoody, Georgia. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind today?
I'm a retired New York City police officer, and I'm wondering why Rudy is being portrayed as this great America's mayor, when in fact, to become elected, he used all these dirty tricks against David Dinkins, along with the New York City PBA. During the Bed-Stuy riots, he tried to divide that community by falsely promoting that David Dinkins was running a program against the Jewish members of that community. And even with the World Trade Center, after the first bombing attempt on the World Trade Center, he was advised to put the communication center in an outer borough, which he refused to do. He placed it back in the World Trade Center. He caused untold numbers of deaths after 9/11, during that 9/11 bombing. But he's still being portrayed as this great America's mayor.
Yeah.
A
friend of mine in New York City had a small business there, selling cigarette papers and stuff like that, bongs and whatnot. And Rudy Giuliani had a choice. He could go after the heroin dealers, after the Italian mafia. He could go after the cocaine dealers, the Colombian mafia, or he could go after the porn shops and the head shops. And he chose the latter. And, and this is when he was district attorney, right? He basically declared war on businesses in New York City rather than declaring war on the mob. Rudy Giuliani has always been corrupt. He was corrupt when he was a prosecutor. He was corrupt when he was mayor. And Sam, I think you did a really, really good job of nailing those things down. And frankly, he's corrupt now that he's pretending to be a lawyer for Donald Trump. Sam, spot on. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Mike in Kane, Virginia. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'd like to bring up a point that I hope that I'm not the only one that's ever thought about this. But what would happen if Donald Trump, you just brought this up just a second ago, in preparation for the Michigan and Wisconsin delegates not going his way, what would happen if he says, you know what, I am going to drop a nuke unless you completely do not let me get convicted for any crime, state, local, or federal. Do you think that's a
drop a nuke where? You mean nuke Michigan?
Say again.
Drop a nuke where?
In Iran.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he would. This is.
I think, Mike, and again, this is purely conjecture on my part. Let me make it very clear. I have no evidence for this. This is just my opinion. My guess is that right now the conversation that's going on between the Republicans who still haven't spoken out, which in the Senate that would be 48 Republicans who are still, theoretically behind Trump, excluding Ben Sasse and Mitt Romney, the only two who have said yes, Joe Biden won. That the negotiation that's going on right now between Mitch McConnell and others in the Republican Party and Donald Trump is how does he get a pardon? How does he get immunity? What kind of deal can he cut? Is there anything that they can do to help him stay out of jail? I'm guessing that that's going to be his next step. Right now, he's trying to steal the election. It's not going to work. Yep. And it's doing incredible damage to America, and the Republicans are figuring that out. And the next step is going to be deal cutting. He is he brags about being, this great deal cutter. And so, right. We'll see. We'll see. But I'm expecting that there's going to be some sort of a Richard Nixon kind of thing. And this is what I've been saying for a long time. I think a month, probably at Christmas time, he's going to go down to Mar-a-Lago and not come back. And he may even resign a few weeks before the inauguration so that Mike Pence can pardon him and his family. In particular, the Trump crime family, his kids and his son-in-law. Mike, thanks for the call. Al in Schiller Park, Illinois. Hey, Al, what's up?
Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to talk a little bit about conservative media and how that gets to so many local hosts as well and what their motivation is, because we have various ones here, and I just don't necessarily understand why so many of them are going with all the corporate lines, even right now with the election and everything. And we know motivation.
Ken Vogel did a great piece for Politico. Pardon the interruption. We just have a half a minute here. Ken Vogel did a great piece for Politico magazine about 5 years ago, in which he pointed out that the Heritage Foundation is giving $2 million a year to Rush Limbaugh and $1 million a year to Sean Hannity. I'm guessing that there is we know that the Kochs have funded these state networks in every state, and I'm guessing that they're supporting the local right-wing talk show hosts. I have no proof of that, but it would be consistent with what they're doing at the national level with the big national talkers. So they know which side the bread is buttered on, these billionaires. And it ain't the side that has democracy on it. Hey, thanks so much to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, and Jabbermocky for helping keep our program on the air. And thank you to you for sharing the good word, telling your friends about us, and for listening and calling in. Get out there, get active, tag.
You've been
You're
listening
it.
to
See you
Thom
Monday.
Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.